It's estimated that there are over 6 million podcasts that have been started around the world. However, what's crazy is that only 0.5% of those, so around 30,000 podcasts, have ever made it past 20 episodes. In this video, I sat down with Spike O'Connell, who is the founder of Podshop. Spike's consulted with and developed over 100 podcasts, covering everything from D2C brands to B2B organizations, all the way to entertainment podcasts. And he'll be revealing what it takes to grow a podcast from zero to thousands of monthly downloads, and more importantly, how to align your podcast with the specific goals that you have for your business. So let's get straight into it. Spike.
Hi, mate.
So look, the big question I think on a lot of people's mind right now is, have they missed the boat on podcasting? That's always a thing, right? Because it's one of those things I think like a lot of people have been putting it off for a long time, and it's like, oh, is it too late now? Is it even worth us doing it? What are your thoughts on that?
I don't think it's too late at all. I think the barriers to entry for podcasting have certainly increased. And I think it all depends on what your objective is for that podcast. So, you know, we work with hundreds of people in this studio that we are in now. And my question to people is, what is the objective for this piece of content that you are producing? Because although everyone is doing a podcast at the moment, is that the right move for your business, depending, or business or whatever it is, you know, if you're a brand, if you're an influencer, if, you know, a passion project, whatever, is it the right thing? Because they're, like I said, the barriers to entry have increased.
Yeah.
They're not cheap to produce, but in the eyes of TV and broadcast, they are cheap to produce. So that's essentially what's happened. Yeah. There's, especially during COVID, lots of people were looking for a way to kind of get out content, and everyone jumped on podcasts. And, you know, the cost to produce a podcast episode is nothing compared to the cost of, like, let's say, Mr. Beast production videos. But you still get millions of views on podcasts if you are of a certain level and have a certain kind of pull behind you. So it's definitely not too late. If anything, it's still really new. You think about, again, in the world of TV and media, you know, film's been about for years. Radio's been about for years. It's still here. Podcasts haven't. You know, they've been around 10, 20 years. So I think they will evolve, and I think how people approach them should be slightly different, but it's definitely not too late. Definitely.
It's funny, isn't it? Like, I think whenever you look at, like, getting into anything, naturally, it's like, what do they call it? There's that part of the brain, isn't there? It's like the reticular activating system, where when you see something, you see it all the time, right? Like when you say, oh, you never see yellow cars, and then you see all the flipping yellow cars outside. And it's like, I was actually speaking to a friend of mine who's doing a marathon recently, and because they're now training for the marathon, they're speaking to lots of other people like, oh yeah, I'm doing a marathon as well, right? And then you think, oh, flipping out, everyone does a marathon. It's not that special. And I was like, I Googled it, and like, what percentage of the world has done a marathon? It says like 1%, like less than 1% of the entire global population has ever run a marathon. It's like, it is flipping. And it's probably the same with podcasting, right? Like if you're thinking about podcasting, you're getting into it, you're kind of like, oh my God, there's so many podcasts. But when you actually look at the percentage of businesses that have a podcast, it's probably tiny.
Oh, absolutely. And I think another thing to think of as well is that each business has its own individual niche. And I think especially as a business as well, there's other means and other reasons why you would do a podcast. So again, it's like, if someone asked me the question, how do I have a successful podcast? I mean, a lot of people's default answers is you have to release a show every week, which is true. You have to. But really what the question should be is, again, what is the objective for that podcast and for that content? Because as a business, there's a few different ways and reasons why you would do a podcast. Obviously, you've got brand awareness. Obviously, you've got talk to guests, and obviously talk about a topic or something that's around the business that you're doing. But actually, what a lot of people do is use it as a form of lead gen. So gone are the days where, you know, you can schmooze people, take them out for dinner, you know, go for a beer, and people aren't in the office. You know, people want a reason to come into the office. So what a lot of people actually do is that they will create a podcast around a certain topic which related to their brand. But actually, rather than sending an email to someone saying, hey, we do something that we think your business would love, can we sell it to you? It's, hey, really love what you're doing in the space XYZ, would love to have a conversation with you about the industry and how you've grown and established. Then 2 months down the line, after the episode's been released, the email is, hey, that episode was absolutely fantastic, been really, really well received. Here's some of the social clips that we produced. If you ever need any help with XYZ, then let us know.
Yeah, because you've got a foot in the door at that point, right?
Exactly. So all of a sudden, this form of content doesn't just become a piece of media that's shared for people to listen to. It's a way to actually generate the leads for the business. Yeah. And look, it's an expensive way to generate leads. Look, your cost per your customer acquisition is going to be incredibly high. But again, if your average customer value is 50 to 100 grand, if you're spending £1,000 to record it, edit it professionally, that's nothing. Yeah, really 100%. Compared to that. So I think that's always what we would suggest to people. It's take that objective first, because it's not quick and it's not easy to do. Yeah. And also make sure that you're thinking of a podcast in a few different aspects. Yeah. Because the long form isn't just the long form, if that makes sense. You've obviously got the social media clips that you can reduce from it. Yeah. And actually they're partnered, but they're also separate, because good social media clips that perform really well don't necessarily equate to people looking and downloading the long form. Yeah. But what they will do is, again, brand awareness, entice more guests. We actually had a client who they are a trust in education. Okay. It's a super niche, super niche. And I suggested to him, I said, please start a TikTok account. And the host said, look, I'm not too sure about TikTok. I don't think our audience is there. And I said, trust me, just do me a favor, produce it, post some of the clips. Yeah. I think her third clip got 10,000 views. And now they've got 1,000 followers on a TikTok account, which is just, So I think it's just making sure that you are utilizing whatever it is you're doing in enough different assets for it to then make sense.
That's such a good point. Yeah. I see that all the time where businesses have like these, they invest a lot of money in these things, right? Like you say, and it's just like, then they don't use it. They post it once somewhere and it just dies. It's like that can become, so to your point, so many different assets that can last a very long time. If you could even use one of those bits and that can become an ad, and that ad could potentially then generate you tens, hundreds of thousands of pounds in revenue over time, right?
Exactly. So I think, as again, I said, with the barrier to entry that's increased, because that's very true. Gone are the days you could record an audio podcast on Zoom and release it. There was a big bubble during COVID because no one had anything to do. So they were watching and discovering podcasts. Yeah. So I mean, there's a chart. I can't remember what platform it's on, but there's a chart of the growth of podcasts because it spiked for the popularity, and then it's on a downward trajectory. It's starting to level out now. It's still, I think it's like 10x what it was before. So it's kind of gone like this. And what's happened is you could at that time pretty much record anything and have a fair, a bit of success with it because people had nothing to do. Yeah. So the cost of producing a good podcast has increased. The visual element's more expensive. It's more expensive to shoot. It's more expensive to edit. You've obviously got the social aspect now. We can thank TikTok and Instagram Reels for that. The other thing is then, like I said, the TV and film industry are moving to podcasts. People who otherwise would only be seen on the big screen and now shooting podcasts because it's a way for them to keep fresh, especially in the like celebrities and in the film business and stuff like that. People book actors and actresses that are busy, so they've got to be keeping their feeds busy and looking busy, and a podcast is a fantastic way to do that. So that has pushed the cost of productions up, which is again great for us, but again what's important is that people aren't just producing shit. So I think there's a time and a place for certain content, and gone are the days where you can create something that's like Diary of a CEO, if you see what I'm saying. Because it's sort of, especially that space, it's oversaturated.
Yeah.
Health and fitness is a little bit oversaturated now as well. And I always use Dish as a really good example here. The Dish podcast it's backed by Waitrose, Nick Grimshaw.
Okay.
Essentially what they do is they invite a celebrity onto the show, someone preps them loads of food, and then they have a podcast whilst they're eating. And I'll be honest, this is where the lines get really blurred.
Doesn't sound like a very nice audio podcast.
Well, it is a bit, it is a bit nasty on the ears, all the lip smacks. But it's an awesome piece of content. It's like, it's something that's like really engaging and visually interesting to watch.
Like hot wings.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Things with hot wings, all you've got to do is put a podcast microphone there, and it's a podcast.
Yeah.
So actually, the lines get really blurred between what this type of media is. Another example of the Traitors, the Traitors Uncloaked. It's essentially the podcast show that they do after the Traitors, the BBC show.
Oh, really? They got interesting.
Yeah. It's Ed Gamble who
I've heard
presents
of the show. I've never seen it. But
it looks awesome. It's shot in a studio in Soho called The Library. It's actually an audio recording space, but they shoot it on Chesterfield chairs, and the studio's lovely. It sounds great. It looks great. But it's a panel show. They literally get the guests on from that episode that have either gone out of the Traitors, and the only difference is that obviously there's not a kind of a live studio audience when the podcast is recording, and it's one of these microphones rather than a clip-on lav mic. But the reason why people gravitate towards podcasts is that you feel a part of a podcast. You know, people will say, "Oh, what is it you're listening to?" "Oh, yeah, I listen to that." Whereas you don't necessarily relate to a show like the Graham Norton Show or the Jonathan Ross Show, and you can't get as involved or be as part of a community as you are with that.
Yeah.
So I think it's just about being really clever about what it is you're producing. You know, if you're producing a piece of content that is in relation to your business, is there a way you can put a spin on it that then still makes it engaging, just to cut through the noise? I think that's really important.
And it's a really good point, actually, because I guess that it's probably going to vary by different industries and different types of businesses, right? Like you say, the panel style might work really well for very kind of large B2B enterprise organizations where, you know, they do want to have a panel of different experts on and be interviewing different people on a panel to get that. Because this is something I say to our customers a lot, actually, as well, is like, you want to think about people especially in B2B, people in certain industries, they are looking to their peers, right? So if I'm like a CMO at a business, I'm aspiring and I'm watching other CMOs. So if you as a business can host CMOs on your podcast, you're then going to become the podcast I watch, right? Because I want to see what these others see. So it's kind of like thinking about how can you become a host and a platform for like where your audience are looking toward to consume information. It's a really interesting point. And I really like what you mentioned though about how business, like the kind of the goals and expectations you go into it with, because coming back to what we were saying earlier about like, is podcasting, is it too late? I think a lot of people will naturally look at shows like you mentioned, Diary of a CEO, right, where it's very mass market, and it's like, well, you probably don't really want to be trying to replicate them anyway, right? They're trying to just get as many listeners as possible all over the world. For a business, that's probably not your goal. You want to focus on your niche and your target audience. So I think having that expectation then kind of is like, oh, okay, this is actually probably when I look at like the companies in our space that are doing it, suddenly that pool gets a lot smaller. Something else I want to come back to that you mentioned as well is just like how you're using the content in podcasts, because I think that's such a, you know, and to that point as well, the goal of having a podcast, you shouldn't just be like trying to get into the podcast charts, right? That's not necessarily what you're trying to do. Is it maybe a sales enablement tool? Is it maybe even a community tool? I can't think of any examples, but I've seen quite a few like even like kind of, you know, D2C consumer brands having podcasts just as a way to kind of build up. Have you ever worked with any of those, like e-com brands or anything who've done podcasts?
A few actually, and I think I think again, an interesting point you make there about making sure that it is in line with what that business goal is.
Yeah.
Because again, if you are looking, let's say for example, you are a recruitment company that recruits CMOs, as an example, rather than your podcast being about how to recruit a CMO and anything to do with recruitment, actually what the podcast should be is essentially about the struggles that CMOs have. You know, what actually interests them, rather than what you think would be interesting for that content. So it's kind of
very true.
What as in a very simple form, we take the objective of the show and who your target demographic is. You know, basics of any marketing essentially. But then you try and make sure that you develop everything around that. And we always say to people, whatever you do with your podcast, the guests you invite, the topics you discuss, if it doesn't relate back to that objective and that target demographic, don't do it. And you might have the opportunity to get on, let's say, a COO. Their job roles are completely different. The issues they have are not going to be relatable to a CMO. I mean, there might be some crossover, but you know, so even if that guest is fantastic, got 500,000 followers, it's going to alienate your audience and kind of dilute the message that, and the topics you want to discuss. So back to the kind of e-commerce brand. Yes, we've done a couple, and I think again it's interesting and quite tricky because it all depends on, again, what that objective is. If the objective of the podcast is to engage more consumers, then it needs to be something that a consumer is interested in. Now, depending on what the product is, let's say, for example, we'll use makeup as an example. So as a manufacturer of makeup, maybe what you want to do is you want to increase sales, but you also want to highlight some of the key features of this makeup. Let's say it's a sustainable makeup brand. Now, would people be interested in the founder of the e-commerce brand discussing with one of their product developers about why the product is so good and what makes it sustainable? Possibly, but possibly not. It's not going to be something that might draw people in or is going to be really engaging to that person at this point. Like ultimately, they want to use makeup to obviously to look nice, and that's the draw, that's the element. There's a marketing piece behind that.
I guess there's a lot of angles, isn't there? Because you could almost go, and this depends on the brand, but I guess you could go the route of like, you know, maybe it's like empowerment, like maybe how makeup can make you feel empowered and confident, or the angle, like you say, the angle, because maybe if you're looking to target sustainability, people are already kind of sustainably minded, if that's the word. Maybe a good angle is that, and you could get on like environmental experts, right? That kind of thing. So it's a really interesting point, and that actually got me thinking. I haven't really considered this before, but I suppose even for podcasts, naturally you would have, or each episode would probably be targeting different stages of the funnel, right? And the buyer journey almost. Because I guess if you think, one just came to mind is like, you know, Zoe, the kind of health company. So they've got a podcast, I think, haven't they? And when you look, so Zoe is, obviously it's fairly high price, but they're selling to like consumers, and they've got like the general health podcast. And to me, like a lot of that is top of funnel. They know they want to find people who are interested in optimizing their health and their diet. So what they do is they create content about a range of different topics on the gut microbiome, all those things they know their customers will be looking for. But they then have some episodes where they're actually talking about Zoe itself. And it's similar to even this episode we're doing right now, right? It's exactly the same thing where I know our customers, marketing managers, marketing directors, heads of marketing, they are thinking about, should we start a podcast? So they're hopefully going to land on this video and be watching this right now. And this is top of funnel, right? This is kind of introducing them to, oh, who's Elevate Digital, right? And then we have other episodes where we're now talking more about digital marketing services and how to work with an agency, and that's then more mid or bottom of funnel. And I suppose that applies to any brand, really, right, with their episodes.
Well, I think that's exactly it. It's kind of taking that objective, and if the objective of the show is to be a lead generation device, then you do, and you want it to be top of funnel enough so that it is interesting to people, but then it kind of shows that you are the expert in that. And from that, particularly of this episode, is that you've asked me and us, who's got a studio and are experts in what we do.
Yeah.
So again, it's that knowledge and the fact that you've asked me to be on this will hopefully help your potential sales funnel to see, okay, well, yeah, these guys know what they're kind of talking about. So I think that's the big thing, and it's making sure that the guests that you get on and the topics that you discuss are relatable to that audience. And being very clear where in that funnel it is. Because like I said, if the objective is to actually invite potential customers on your lead, you're much lower down that funnel.
Yeah.
So actually, and then dare I say it, your downloads and how many people literally doesn't matter. Like that's not your objective of the show. The objective is actually to make that person feel incredibly comfortable, and the potential lead you're talking to, give them space to talk about, you know, the successes they've had, and it's more about the experience rather than the actual content itself. So then actually it doesn't matter as much. So that's what's really, really important and really clear. And I think that's what a lot of people sometimes get wrong. And it's also quite tricky from a more entertainment podcast perspective, because then it's quite different, because actually the content itself, again, if it's like a cultural podcast or like pop culture as an example, it's then having a spin on things that work really nicely. Yeah. There was a show that they shot with us a few times called The Hun's Net. A fantastic show. Brilliant show. The concept is they talk about Hun culture, which is like,
I don't even know what that is.
It's like 90s, noughties, think like Britney Spears, groovy chick, you know, girls aloud, and like it's brilliant. It's just so much fun. And then they invite on someone who is in the media at the moment. So a previous guest, they've had people from The Traitors, they've had people from Big Brother, and they talk about Hun culture. So they ask people to bring in an item, their honeyest item, they call it. And the host will buy something online from that. Like I think one time he had a groovy chick mug, and then there was like a Girls Aloud McDonald's toy and stuff. I think it resonates with me because it's, you know, same Asian demographic. But the way that the show is pulled together, it's just culturally, it works really nicely. I really enjoyed doing that show actually. But again, it's having this marketable idea that works, and I think that's what's important. It's having the time to think about it, and don't think of it as a podcast to start off with. Think of it as a piece of content, and be creative around that. You know, if you're let's say that you're a manufacturer of outside furniture, let's say you're a commercial supplier of benches, your product is outside, you're targeting a fairly niche audience. Would coming into a studio to record actually be the best bet? Possibly not. You know, who are you trying to target? Are you trying to target end users? Are you trying to target the buyers of those products? So let's say, for example, you're a manufacturer of outside furniture, garden benches, commercial. Councils are your main focus. But actually, it's the end user that's going to be using these. So it's the public. So how about producing a show that you shoot on a bench in a public place where one of your products is installed? Let's say it's a park in London. You shoot on that bench, you are talking with either a manufacturer or something along those lines, but actually part of that show is around trying to find people that are in the park on the day.
And you've now made that your unique mechanism.
And that's your unique mechanism. You know, you're getting a very small snippet, and you know, you don't have to talk about the benches to that end user, because they don't give a shit what they're sat on. You know, but actually what you can just talk to them about is the surrounding area, the view that they're looking at, you know. So actually the bench all of a sudden doesn't become the focus. The focus, you've done the focus around that in some form of element. Let's say it is sustainability. More
like subliminal.
Subliminally, and I think that's again, that's what Dish does very well with Waitrose. Waitrose back that. That's it's so subliminal in that respect. So I think have a little think around this and get creative with it. also at the same time, don't overstretch. Shooting on location is expensive. So I say that it would cost twice as much to produce in that respect. But I think that then becomes something, another show as well. We work with a brand called Homing In. Fantastic show. It's by the Modern Home. Okay. They're essentially a estate agents for high net worth individuals. And their show, essentially, they go to the homes of famous designers, painters, artists, shoot B-roll around the home, and then do a podcast episode. And then they go through what the home means to them throughout their life.
Oh, that's cool.
Not promoting the brand at all whatsoever. Yeah. The host, Matt's fantastic. He's a really, really good host. And we've been to some super cool locations, some really crazy studios and apartments and stuff. But again, it's slightly subliminal. And some of those videos are like, because I think they did one with like Reggie Yates and stuff, and it's like you're racking up loads and loads of views, and just subliminally kind of people are aware that this is what the brand does and this is who they are.
It's a really smart idea. I was speaking to the VP of marketing at a company recently, and she was saying, she said, like, when they look at their content they're producing, the question they always ask is like, it's not the tendency is to say, okay, what would this buyer want to watch? And it's like, no, scrap that. It's like, what would this person as a individual want to actually watch? Like, what would they find entertaining? Even if you do want them to be a buyer, it's like you have to think about that like get out of the lens of like, but like, the whole buying, that bottom of funnel mentality. It's kind of like, to your point about that home one, it's like, what is the kind of content that a high net worth individual would want to watch? Like, they're looking at those other things. They're seeing what these other people are doing. It's that kind of peer group mentality, right? It's a really interesting angle on it, actually.
Yeah, and I think it's hard to do. It's not easy, and especially if you've like never produced a piece of content like this as well. Yeah, and I think that's where I think people can take ownership a little bit more as well. I think be creative with it, be open with it, and don't be afraid to like try these things out, because we always say to people, always plan for like 2 series. You don't have to have breaks. It's kind of TBC on how many episodes are in them. But the first lot, you're testing the content. Yeah. You're testing, have you got that demographic right? Because you can always hazard a guess, but you never know if it is quite right. And you're also testing that content. You'll start to learn which pieces work better, which pieces engage more, especially with social media stuff as well. Because like if you're cutting social media clips from this long form content, you can, there's obviously ways that content does well. You look for a hook at the start of a social media clip, first 4 or 5 seconds has to be super engaging. You've got the value add in the middle, payoff at the end, basics of a social media clip. But what clips perform better, you start to learn over time. Yeah. So we had...
Yeah, some might work well on one platform, another on a different platform.
Exactly. And I think less so platform to platform, but more in terms of actually the content of the clips themselves. So there definitely is a difference. But for example, we're working with 2 doctors, tested loads and loads of different social clips. And the social clips we found worked better or had a higher chance of going viral or performing better were ones that started with, there was this patient, I had someone that came in, there was this guy that was on the operating table. We used to perform really, really well. And then the other type of clip was rare diseases, which was weird because we never did an episode about a rare disease. It was mentioned in relation, because the episodes were fairly broad, and they were mentioned in relation to that, to the kind of broader topic. But social media audience just jumped on it. They were like, so happy people are talking about this. I've just been diagnosed. We found this tip really, really helpful. Glad this. So, and actually, I think two clips about rare diseases equated for 1/3 of their social media growth over 6 months. Wow. We grew into about 6,000-7,000 followers or something like that. So actually, and that's all organic with that as well. So it's also, again, try and remove yourself from what you think is right in terms of what you want people to see. Yeah. Because we do see that sometimes, especially with businesses. Like they want to do a social media clip and it's like the intro to the podcast. Like no one gives a shit about that. Like, it's not going to perform well on socials. Actually, what you want to do is take a really, really juicy bit,
Yeah.
make it really concise, really cutty if it needs to be, because that is what people are engaging with at the moment.
100%. I mean, we see that all the time with ads. Like, you know, you'll get a business that, you know, gives us like a bit of content, and it's like got this just intro of their logo, and it's like no one's watching that.
Yeah.
If we put that in any, like, a LinkedIn feed, an Instagram feed, those first 3 seconds, if it's your logo, no one's watching it.
Yeah, exactly.
Why would I want to stop and watch a logo?
The drop-off's huge, yeah.
Exactly. To your point, you have to have that hook, and it has to give that person a reason to want to watch it. And I think you touched on something really important as well there, is, like you say, keeping an open mind and having that mentality of like experimentation. Like, just you just don't know what's going to work, and very often it is the things that you just never would have thought worked that end up working.
Oh yeah, yeah, and you see it all the time with influencers. They're like, you know, they'll say about all of the content that they've scripted, they've spent hours doing. There's a guy actually, and he's called Fred Asquith. He's a big techno DJ. That's what he was before he did social media. And I think some of his best performing social media stuff is when he went shopping with his girlfriend, fiance, and was putting on a bit of a front as a traditional male in the shopping. It was like, oh, can I take the basket? And just being a pain, like putting his hands in the... Millions of views. Millions and millions of views. Super simple. Did he think that clip was going to do better than some of the ones that he's, you know, spent more time scripting? Probably not. So I think that's it. If you have an idea, doesn't matter how wacky it is or how wild it is, give it a go. Because ultimately you can delete the thing. You know, if it doesn't perform well, or if you're like, oh shit, I really don't like it, then you can delete it. But that's what I would say with that. And start again thinking about what the objective, where it's going, and making sure that things are formatted for that kind of posting space. For example, with the clips, making sure it does have that hook, and it you know, it doesn't have to be a hook in terms of speaking. It can be a visual hook as well. There's another guy on social media, I can't remember his name, but he does illusions and things like that. I think at one point the biggest viewed video on TikTok was at a distance you see someone on a broomstick, and it looks like they're on a broomstick, and then they get a bit closer, you're like, is that guy on a broomstick? There's your hook. There's a visual hook there, so it's not an audible one. Visual hook. The value add is starting to get a bit closer, you're like, oh, okay. And then the payoff at the end, you see it's a mirror, and then he's on a hoverboard behind it. One of the most watched videos on TikTok, I think it was. So it's just taking whatever it is you're trying to produce, and then even if it is, you know, a 30, 45 second ad in, you know, having that hook at the start. You see it all over Instagram. I love the kebab shop ones. Don't know if you ever see them. So there's someone will be like lying underneath a car, and then there'll be like a siren going in the background. Someone will rush up to him with the phone. They'll be like, oh, you're okay. And he'll go, yeah. And then he'll stand up and be promoting his kebab shop. Brilliant. Love that. Love that. Curries have been bang on in it as well. Their social media games, fantastic. Socials, so it's like, it's the same.
You can use props to... That's actually quite an interesting point. I suppose it's... I think it was a dish one you gave as an example. Like that then becomes, you can use different props and things to kind of, because with a podcast like this we don't really have any props, right? So the hooks are going to be just, but I suppose that comes down to your point earlier of like having that unique mechanism. Like, what can you find, what can you use and what was that other one you mentioned about the
Hunsnet?
Where they bring in different things and different
exactly. So
even someone seeing some sort of retro thing from the 90s, right? It's like, oh, that's...
Exactly. There's your hook there. So I think don't be too confined to like two people sat here talking. Because ultimately the format is a long form video, and ultimately it's defined by these podcast looking microphones. It's content at the end of the day. It's just called a podcast. So don't think, oh well, that's not podcasty. Doesn't matter, because it will go onto the same platform. You know, you can label it as a podcast, but that's what will entice people in. And especially with the social media elements as well. Now, pulling good social media clips from podcasts can be a little bit tricky sometimes. You'll get the good content for the rest of the clip. You know, I've been ringing off some advice and some clips and stuff here, which will probably clip up nicely. But what's tricky is actually the hook. Especially for an informative business podcast as well. You know, if it's something, you know, we work with a couple of addiction coaches and addiction charities. Now they are, you know, very emotional and talking about the stories. And the host, Paul Scolfer, he's fantastic. You know, really, you know, very, very calm and leads the conversation in such a nice way. But actually, because they are quite emotional and they are discussing, you know, very personal stories that have really affected people. Thinking again a bit selfishly, you know, kind of removing that aspect for a moment, from a content perspective, it's great because they are very emotional, which people will relate to a lot easier on social media. And especially with that kind of space, because it's, you know, people that are looking for help and so on and so forth. So anything that is either outright mental, we had 2 drag queens we were working with, they were doing shots of pickle juice. Again, crazy, but we used to do little montagey clips which worked quite well for them, which I wouldn't really recommend doing, but they're nuts. They were absolutely crazy. Fantastic to have in the studio. Nightmare for audio engineering.
I suppose all of this, right, it all comes back to the point you made earlier of like, because there might be people listening to this, like, oh, fuck, but it's like, it all comes back to like, what is your goal? Because it's like you mentioned, right, you've got the kind of, if you've got a podcast which your goal is like, it's an entertainment podcast and your goal is to monetize the podcast through growing an audience, that like, it's almost like I see it as like 2 different channels, right? It's like you mentioned earlier of like more lead gen for like, if it's a business creating a podcast and your goal is to generate leads, the onus then comes down to you in terms of distributing that content in an effective way to generate leads, as opposed to a more kind of entertainment style podcast. The sole goal is to get the audience as big as possible so that you can monetize it. So the things you do naturally are going to look very different, right?
Yeah, and I think that's a really important part of that as well. You know, we've had a few people come to us and they said, "Oh, I want to start a podcast to promote our new product." And I've gone, "Okay, well, that's not a good idea." Because a podcast is a lot like a business, really. You know, the content is the product, the business is essentially the podcast. You know, you can have the best product in the world, you know, it could be the cure for a terminal illness, you know, but if you're not telling people and the right people about it, it's not going to do well. So, you know, if you were essentially investing in the podcast to be the marketing of that product, it's not going to work, because the podcast is essentially a product that needs to be marketed itself. Which is where a lot of people fall short. They'll spend the money on the production, it will look and sound great, but then they don't have a marketing plan for that podcast behind it.
That's a really good point.
Now, again, it does all go back to the objective, because if your objective is to speak to potential customers, so again, it's to invite people on the show, and it's not to gain hundreds of thousands of downloads, actually the marketing part of that podcast is less important. But if it is to grow, you know, you have to put money behind it. And again, that's why the barrier to entries have been pushed up, because you've got all these bigger shows that are pumping money into it, because the returns at that level are pretty high, but there's no in between. You know, it's a real trick. We're trying to develop some things actually to bring the cost of podcast advertising down. You know, we run some good Google Ads campaign. We'll run you a great Google Ads campaign, but you know, it's going to be very hard to track whether it's converting to a potential sale of that product. So it's, you know, it's trying to again take that objective and align the expectations on that as well. And I think that's where social media massively comes into it, because if you do get really good social clips and if they do go viral, you are then promoting the brand or the podcast, you know, that will do very, very well. But it's hard to do. You know, it is very hard to do. So it is important that people have that in the back of their heads. Don't just shoot stuff and then release it, because Spotify and Apple are crap for finding new podcasts. It's not like Google. You know, it's people don't sit and scroll for Apple and Spotify to find content. Do you know what I mean? So YouTube's a little bit different, because obviously as a platform, second biggest search engine in the world. You can find stuff through SEO and things like that, and but pay attention to like, that as well.
I think with like podcasts and long form for YouTube, it kind of like you can package and position an episode, or maybe even like 10 or 15 minutes of an episode, in a lot of different ways. right? And that's often what it comes down to. It's like how you package that bit of content is going to have a major impact on how well it does. To your point earlier of like hooks, it's like even like on a YouTube video, it's kind of like the thumbnail, the title you give it, like how are you choosing to package that? Something also, because I think there are so many secondary benefits, right, that people don't think about. And something you mentioned earlier with the experimentation piece, I think just naturally in the style and format of a podcast being conversational, the conversation can go in lots of different ways as long as it's not too scripted, right? And this is one of the things I love about it, in that sometimes they go in ways you didn't expect. And as a result of that, you then have bits of content to test that you might never even have thought of before, because your guest has mentioned something that you wouldn't have necessarily thought about. And you might just find that does really well. So I think even from like a kind of audience research, R&D standpoint, if you want to call it that, by having this kind of format, you can discover things about your audience that you might not have otherwise known just by having these longer form discussions. Then obviously the other benefit to just longer form discussions in general, you're getting all this time to build up trust with potential buyers. Whether you're a D2C e-com brand, whether you're a B2B business selling, a product or service worth millions of pounds or millions of dollars, you can't underestimate or deny the impact of just having more time with your consumers, more listening time, more watching time. That is going to inevitably build trust and get somebody closer to an actual buying decision, right? So one of the things I'd love to finish on, Spike, because this has been awesome, but you mentioned earlier about the kind of barrier to entry to podcast. This is one of the things I love about you guys and what you're doing, because you are, even by having these amazing studios and these environments where people can come to, you are lowering that barrier to entry, right? Because like otherwise, like, businesses are probably thinking like, flipping out, like, we can't like build a studio. Like maybe they're all remote. It's like, where are we going to do it?
Yeah.
And you're creating that space where the businesses are remote, whether they've got offices, but they just don't have the space or resources to create their own podcast studio. You're giving people the space to do that. Tell people a bit about kind of what you guys are doing and how you're working with businesses to help facilitate that.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, we've been doing podcasts for years. We started off as primarily audio post-production. We was editing a few bits and bobs that were recorded in studio. COVID was a big turning point. It was when I was just doing it on my own with a couple of other engineers, that I was sort of farming out some of the work to. But it all moved to remote.
Yeah.
So we completely revamped all of our remote recording processes and was doing tons of remote stuff. This was kind of before video, however. So after we kind of started doing that, everything kind of opened back up, was growing things very slowly. And we kind of have seen the full growth from remote to back to in the studio, then audio to video. And what we've kind of seen is that when we kind of opened our first space at the beginning of last year, there were a few spaces. It's not a unique idea. The original space we opened, it was a space in a room in a co-working space. Yeah, we boarded the windows up. We did a bit of acoustic treatment, but actually it allowed us to test the market, just make sure that there was enough interest, and actually learn what people like and didn't like. So I myself, first 3 months before I hired a fantastic team that we got here, I did all of the recording sessions for like the first 2-3 months. I was knackered, absolutely knackered. But it helped me to work out, for example, in this studio, you see all the peripheral lights that are behind me here. So we worked out that actually the lighting, if you shoot front facing, just washes out the set. It looks crap. And then we used to use these, uplighters that just used to get booted across the floor because people didn't see them. Battery powered, you have to swap the batteries out, and then they broke. So it's like, okay, cool. Well, let's put in fixed lights. You can change the color of these for people if they want to change it for the branding. So what it is that we're trying to do here, we've not just built a space to get people in to record. We've built a space that is actually helpful for for people's requirements,
Yeah.
but also all the while still trying to make it neutral and accessible enough for different businesses and different means.
Yeah, because you change the studios as well, don't you?
Exactly. Yeah, so we've got a few different layouts. This is one of the layouts we do. We've got a table and chairs. You can't actually see it on camera, but we've got a screen that's kind of just up there, which is one of the Samsung frame screens. One comment we had, it was like, we'd love to be able to put our branding up on the podcast. I was like, okay, cool. You put a normal TV, it's just a black slab on the wall. It's crap. But this, you can put up a piece of artwork, and if you didn't know, especially if you've got the wide shot, you wouldn't know that it was a TV. So there's little things like that, and having the separate control rooms and the breakout space before you actually come into the studios to not just be a space that you can produce good content, but it's also a really nice environment, because I think that's really, really important as well. It's important 100%. That whoever's recording feels comfortable from the moment they walk through the door, because the content will suffer. So we've got the 2 studios here, which I think we're one of the only ones that has kind of like separate control rooms. Is fully soundproof. You know, we have got 2 on location. We've got like a tea point. You know, people can chill out, get sort of teas and coffees and stuff. But off the back of that as well, we're also developing loads of other services around the studio to make it still accessible to businesses. The majority of our clients are small businesses.
Yeah. Do you do like the editing and stuff
exactly,
as well, right?
Yeah.
And
so we can do So we can do the full end to end. So we can actually help people develop the actual concept and the branding, the ideas of the show. We do all the branding element. We can do the recording, the post, the social clips. We can manage people's social media accounts. And then as well as that, we're developing these kind of paid marketing campaigns that equate to more podcast statistics. Because the thing is, it's like to get 1,000 clicks on a Google Ads campaign, 1,000 downloads on a podcast, you know, whatever, let's say that costs you, I don't know, 300 quid, 400 quid, or whatever. 400 quid for 1,000 downloads, you know, for something that is still potentially a lead generation for your business. It's not great. You know, it's like,
especially when it's maybe more top of funnel as well.
Exactly.
Like we were talking about,
exactly that. So it's like, and again, we'll create a great Google Ads campaign. You know, it'll be great from that perspective, but actually it doesn't really work for podcasts. You know, so we've been testing lots of different ways. We're moving more towards display ad campaigns, and using some AI to kind of optimize those, which are performing really well. So you can get a lot more downloads. We're talking sort of 10,000 downloads a month for $1,000. You know, so it's a lot more applicable for people that are looking to grow a show. And although it's still expensive, it's much more affordable and much more direct to that content and to that objective than what's kind of out on the market. We're also doing some work around sponsorship as well, because again, podcast sponsorship is one of those things that's kind of a bit, you know, black hat, under the radar. You can't really, no one really knows too much about it. It's like, can you get sponsored? How many downloads do you have to get? It's like, is it worth signing up to these ad platforms? So we're doing a lot of research in that at the moment, and we're lucky that we've got the capacity to do that because we're so busy. But it's all stuff that we want to be able to give back to people and be able to say, okay, obviously for a cost, you know, we're a business, we've got to run, it's not going to be free, but actually dissecting some of this, because again, it's a new industry. It's a new thing. You know, you've got bigger podcast production companies, but they haven't been around years and years and years. And some of them I suppose have, but you know, it's still a relatively new thing. So we're just trying to dissect all of that and again offer it at an affordable rate, but also for what it is, because it is high quality. That was the plan. It's always meant to be high quality, and we are one of the more expensive studios. I'm happy to admit that, but that was always the plan. Just because we wanted it to be top drawer. So
I love that. And I suppose to your point, it can be as big or as little as you want it to be, right? It's like you can go all in and do all of that if you want to, or if it makes more sense, maybe you just want to get some clips that you can start using in marketing or ads or whatever, use it as a lead gen. That's cool as well. And you're kind of allowing kind of businesses, whatever the objective, to kind of have a lower barrier to entry to that. So we'll link to Podshop in the like links and stuff below. But Spike, thanks. It's been awesome having you on.
Thanks, Tom. It's been nice to talk about podcasts rather than
be on the other side of it.
Yeah, no, really appreciate it. Thanks.
Awesome.
And thanks for supporting us and shooting here as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, obviously you are here supporting us, and we are a small business ourselves, so we really appreciate it. And you know, anyone that is shooting here, hopefully we should have another 4 studios by September.
Very nice.
We're looking to expand, so a bit more capacity for you, because I know this session was a bit of a struggle to get in. So.
Yeah. Awesome. Cool. Thanks, Spike.
Thanks, Tom.